Now with the news that the federal debt is topping $21 trillion for basically the first time in recorded history, President Trump is now calling for another plan to help boost the sluggish economy. Did I say new plan? I actually meant the old plan. According to the Washington Post, on Friday, President Trump said he wanted to further lower the corporate tax rate as part of a second round of tax cuts later this year. Now, he had an interview on Fox News about this, and he said, quote, "One of the things that we're thinking about is bringing the 21% down to 20% for the most part. The rest of it will go right to the middle class." And I think that's what he said about this one. It's a great stimulus. Really? Except that we've had that already. We've had regular tax cuts, and we've had we've had corporate tax cuts and tax cuts for the rich. And guess what? It did absolutely nothing. It can be a short-term stimulus, but not necessarily good for the long term. In fact, it ends up being very bad for the long term. Now, first, look, we've had the tax cuts from the GOP in effect for about 6 months. Have you guys seen any sort of change in your after-tax take-home? Anything that's even decent? I mean, I know Paul Ryan was bragging about that $1.50 that a school teacher was saving. But is it anything substantial? I mean, look, you save $1.50 or you save $5 or whatever, but the average member of the top 1% saves over $60,000 in that same year. Who are the tax cuts benefiting? I know Republicans are like, oh, they call it crumbs. That's because it is crumbs. That's literally what you call crumbs. $1.50 compared to 61,000 in just a year. Now, and of course he wants to do this again, right? The corporate tax cuts and regular tax cuts, he wants to do it again and again and again. Now, what would the effect of doing that would be? Well, lowering the tax rate from 21 to 20% for corporations would result in an additional $100 billion in tax cuts over the next 10 years, according to most economic models. That's $100 billion over the next 10 years less for programs like food stamps and affordable housing. And, of course, it goes right into the pockets of the richest corporations in the world. What a brilliant plan. Let's give rich people who already have most of the money and already have gained tremendously, 83% of the benefits went to the top 1%. Let's just give them more money. At what point will it be enough? Well, now Trump has talked about lowering the corporate tax rate to 15%. But let's do the 20% first. And save $100 billion for these giant corporations. Look, Trump didn't say whether the Republican planned any other changes to tax policy that might offset the new tax cuts, by the way. And look, there's a reason for that. Is because they're not actually fiscally responsible. You think Republicans are fiscally responsible? No. They're Santa Claus. They give giveaways, just like they accuse Democrats of giving, but their giveaways go to the rich and corporations, i.e. their donors. All that money gets shoveled to the richest Americans who give overwhelmingly to Republican politicians. It's the money. We've got to get rid of the money. We've got to get it out of politics. It is a disease. It's killing us. It's a cancer. And of course, you know what they're doing now? As a result of these tax cuts, and I've reported on it before, $1.5 trillion, right, in tax cuts went to the rich. Now they're trying to cut Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. In fact, we've already seen about $800 billion in proposed cuts to Medicaid, and also work requirements that are being put in, which, by the way, there's a story where a state tried to put in work requirements. They got rebuffed by a federal judge, And so in retaliation, they decided to strip a bunch of things, benefits inside of Medicaid in order to punish poor people. Even though they'll still get Medicaid, they'll have less benefits inside of that program. Because they wouldn't allow the changes to Medicaid to have work requirements inside of it. And that's one of the major things that the Trump administration has been trying to do. Now, what's the reason for this? What's the midterms? Republicans think that this is going to fire up the base. Oh, more tax cuts for rich people. You realize that most of the Americans, I should say, hate these tax cuts. Why? It's because they go to the rich. In fact, as I said before, a majority of the benefit went to the rich. And what did they do? They went and they took that money, they put it in their own pockets. They bought back their own stock, these corporations did, and artificially inflated their stock values. That's what they did with the money. They didn't create more jobs. They gave out a couple of bonuses here and there, but they didn't raise the wages for a lot of their workers, which actually would be a real stimulus for the economy. But again, that does not help rich people get richer in the short term. And that's what it's all about. So they think that this is a winning idea to cut taxes before the midterms. That's going to be a tough sell. This current tax bill is that about 30% popularity. They're deeply, deeply unpopular. But of course, they're going to add in, hey, look, what we're doing, we're going to make the middle class tax cuts completely permanent. Remember how they were not permanent and only the corporate tax cuts? Well, forget about the corporate tax cuts. We're going to make these middle class tax cuts permanent, and we're going to cut it just a little bit more. Now, look, I'm fine with cutting taxes for the middle class. I think that's a good idea, but not the rich. But see, what they're going to do is they're going to tie that to the corporate tax cuts to try to sell it. It's the same thing that they did before. But here's the thing. We don't need to cut corporate taxes. We actually need to raise them dramatically. We need to go to the other side here. Because look, nobody ever asks how we're going to pay for things, right? For example, whenever somebody on the left comes up with, hey, let's do Medicare for all. Let's do healthcare for everybody. Let's increase education spending so that our schools are not falling apart. Let's make it so that people who graduate from college aren't loaded out with debt. Everybody always asks, how are you going to pay for that? How are you going to pay for that? But they never ask that question when it comes to cutting taxes for the rich. They never ask that question. It's just kind of funny. And so, look, what we're doing, what Trump's plan, what the Republicans have been doing is leading us towards a recession. I mean, do you know what led to the last recession? Deregulation, massive tax cuts for the rich, and more military spending. What have we done so far in the Trump administration with Republican control? Deregulation, tax cuts for the rich, and both Democrats and Republicans just voted to give an extra $70 billion to the military-industrial complex. And now they want to add another $100 billion worth of tax cuts into the mix. If I were you, I'd be very concerned about another recession. Except this time, it actually might be worse. Because if it happens under Trump's watch, with Trump in charge, prepare for a lot of pain and a lot of austerity. That's what's going to happen under this administration. I can almost guarantee it. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.